What's up, everyone? Pags here at MEI Studio. We have what I hope is the final chapter of the 57 Alternative series. We're going head-to-head with the 57's closest relative, the Shure 545 SD, in a battle of Unidyne 3s. It's new versus old, metal versus plastic, this week on the Mic Locker. Microphones are all unique devices that have their own nuances. Some differences are subtle or almost non-existent, like in the case of a very carefully matched pair. Others vary wildly from mic to mic, like in the cases of many extremely cheap mics that are made with little regard to keeping tolerances for components in check. And still, another reason is age. Like a fine bottle of wine, some age gracefully and may subjectively improve over time. Others can begin to deteriorate over the years and break down both physically and functionally, as we saw in the case of the PL10 and the E609 bench tip videos. Some mics can be restored to working order, where others not so much. But what happens when you have a mic like the SM57, which will be celebrating its 60th anniversary in 2025, and the 545 hitting its 65th anniversary in 2024? The mics have been in constant production for a very long time, with not much change over those years. Other mics like the 55, which have been in production since the 1930s, have had significant changes made to them over the years, both in its physical appearance as well as its internal workings. But the 57 and 545 have remained relatively the same. Is it a case of don't fix what isn't broken, or were there changes secretly made to it over the years that resulted in quantifiable differences between versions, as well as countless arguments between engineers as to which version is best? Let's take a quick dive into the history and construction of these two mics. We saw in our 55 video, link up top, that the Unidyne capsule was developed back in the late 1930s. Between 1939 and 1959, the Unidyne capsule saw three major revisions: the Unidyne 2, and the Unidyne 3. There was also a Unidyne 4 in the 548 series, but that line didn't really live on like the Unidyne 3s. The Unidyne 3 was a major breakthrough in design and the first of the series to be end addressed as opposed to side addressed like the 55s were. The capsule was put into a mic called the 545, which by outward appearance looks strikingly similar to the 57 we know today. The SM57 was a later variant of the 545, and there were many. The 545 has a selectable output impedance and an on-off switch, where the 57 only has low impedance and no switches at all. It's the same capsule, same head basket, same body length, but different materials, and a different transformer. Let's take a look at the physical construction of these mics. First, the shared head basket. All of these mics share the same four-part head basket consisting of the plastic grill, a metal mesh screen, a pad, and a resonator cap. The foam pad is susceptible to breaking down over the years, much the same as the RE20 and E609 foam, but it's less destructive when it goes since it's isolated above the resonator. These components haven't really changed much except for a few years where Shure added a metal mesh around the pad, like we can see here on our old 57 and our 545. Some believe the capsule itself changed materials from copper to aluminum. However, I don't believe this to be a thing, as a solid copper billet would have had a host of corrosion problems that I've never seen on any 57, or 545 for that matter. I have, however, seen a change from a natural aluminum to an anodized metal look, which I guess if you're not familiar with metals, you could probably confuse with copper, since it does have a more yellow or orangish hue to it. On the actual diaphragm, there is a copper layer connected to the membrane that is identical between the old and the new mics. And the retaining ring used to be made out of copper, as ours is, so maybe something got lost in translation there. Some 545s and 57s suffer from what's sometimes referred to as cap rattle, where the cap isn't quite snug enough on the retaining clip and loud sources can cause the cap to physically rattle, and it does get picked up in recordings. Shure used to offer kits which were just little strips of foam that one could stuff between the head basket and the mesh below the cap. Not sure if they still do that, but now they're suggesting using Ducko cement to lock the cap down. don't do this. It's not a good solution, and honestly, it's just silly for Shure to even suggest this. So much can go wrong by gluing the cap to your mic. Just don't do it. Use foam if you have to stop the rattle from happening if you're having it happen. Below the capsule is a screw that juts out of the bottom, which just holds a small board that has the capsule leads soldered to it, which connect to the transformer leads. This board has changed color and material over the years, but how much effect does that have on the sound? Yeah, none. Some of the early 57s have had a kind of peanut butter looking substance inside the cavity, which I've seen on a couple of mics, but not in others. I haven't seen this at all in any of the 545s I've used, and I assume that whatever this stuff is could possibly interfere with the switch operation that's in there. Could that stuff be some kind of secret tone sauce? Gonna doubt that. Then there's the transformer. Older 57s and 545s had a copper bar which suspended the transformer in the body. I guess hot glue wasn't a thing yet. The transformer itself looks to have changed a bit, but the actual data for the transformers I haven't been able to find. The 545 has an extra feature just before the XLR connector where the end user can change the impedance if needed. By connecting the hot wire to a different pin, you can change the impedance and you can take the bottom out and screw it back in. It's a pretty easy process, but how many times are you going to have to do that? The SM57 is a straight shot from the transformer right to the XLR. As far as the bodies go, the 545 has a plastic upper barrel where the 57 is all metal from below the grill. The plastic was used to reduce cost and weight and was intended to be used for installations like podiums, lecterns, and the like. The 57 was purposely made all metal for more rigorous stage use. The 545 has a shiny brushed aluminum look to the lower half of it, where the body of the 57 is a dark grayish-blue enamel finish. I'll note that the color can and does scratch and wear off over time. Originally, all Shure mics were made in the USA. In 1984, as a cost savings measure, Shure moved their production to Mexico. The tooling was moved along with all the plates and other things needed to produce their product line. Arguments have been made that this move broke something with the production of the mic. Shure has been adamant that the only changes made to the mic since moving its production line outside of the USA have been only positive, as in to improve the mic's construction and quality controls. That statement has been vehemently refuted by many an engineer, especially on certain gear forums. That last one's my favorite. The sentiment is that the made in USA mics were better sounding. However, not many agree on what those differences are and how best to convey what it is that they're hearing. It's always interesting to see how people use non-audio related words to discuss the sound of something. Warm, bright, smooth, dark. They're all great words to discuss a heater, a light bulb, a wood finish, and apparently the closet that a lot of these people are recording vocals in. I rarely see two people that are discussing something of this nature that have the same definition for any of those words, so they're all kind of just BSing, and we really should stop doing that. So, what does a US branded mic sound like versus a Mexican branded mic? Well, since we don't have a new mic made in the USA, we have to rely on 40-plus-year-old mics and compare them with the mics that just came off the line. I call that a bit unfair, but it is what it is, and that's all we have to go off of. And what are the differences between the 545 and the SM57? That's the question we're here to put to the test. Let's put the internet arguments aside and use our ears to make that decision. There's one rabbit hole I'd like to journey down before we get into the listening examples. It's been said that the SM57s, and by association the 545s, like lower impedance loads at the pre. Our impedance video, link up top and down below, would like to argue that point based on its findings, but I'm more than happy to put that theory to the test, and a quantifiable test not based on opinion or ears. Some argue that it brings out the top end, others claim it smooths out the top end. My guess is that it does nothing at all when adjusted for output level, since my own tests on other mics have shown that impedance changes kind of affect the bottom end on ribbon mics, but not really the top end, and the differences are pretty much nil on moving coil mics. I'm going to run 4 frequency sweeps on all 4 mics. I'm going to set the impedance to 150 ohms, 600 ohms, as suggested in the article that made this claim, 1.5K, and 15K. I'm going to calibrate the mics before each sweep to match output levels using a 1 kHz tone. I'm also going to make sure that the mic is in as close to the exact same position for each sweep as well as between mics using a laser guide. The mics will be set up exactly 22 inches or 55.88 centimeters from the middle of the monitor to the mesh cap of the mic to try and remove any kind of proximity effect bias there might be. Here we go. Let's look at this from a detailed point of view. First thing I want to bring up is the calibration. At 1 kHz, I matched each mic to -36 dBFS at 1 kHz before each sweep with each change in impedance. Even with the level match, the levels for the full sweep were wildly off when adjusted for peak level at each impedance setting. I find it interesting, but I'm probably alone in that. The final results are all peak level matched, and that's what I'm going with. Second, since the Cloudlifter Z is variable, I used a multimeter to measure the 600 and 1.5K values to get as close as possible to each test on each mic. Turns out the minimum position is 150.7 ohms, which is pretty close to advertised, whereas the top end of 15K actually measures out closer to 16K, but as we saw in the impedance video, when you're up that high, 1K doesn't really make much of a difference. Okay, here are the actual results of the tests. Okay, we're going to look at the new 57 here. Here it is at 600 ohms, and we're going to run it again at 1.5K. And now we're going to switch between the 600 and the 1.5K. We can see very little bit of change anywhere. In fact, the bottom end doesn't change at all. So let's take a look at the new and old SM57. We have the new SM57 in gray and the old in red. As you can see, the new SM57 has a little bit higher bump in the bottom end. It's only a couple of dB or so. And the old one actually has a little bit brighter top end. The mid-range is virtually identical. Now, I can hear you saying, well, maybe your vintage 57 isn't right. Well, I borrowed a friend of mine's and we did the test again. So here's the difference between my 57 and his. Mine is slightly higher output, and his has a little bit more top end, and that's about it. They're no more different than two mics that might come off the line today. They're dynamic mics, and they're all going to be slightly different. All right, having seen that, do we really need to do the listening tests? Yeah, why not? Let's listen to each of them in practice and see if they perform any differently. We're going to use each mic on a guitar cabinet and snare drum, two of the most common places people stick SM57s. Let's get to it. All right, so there was a third test that we did here, and you've been listening to it the entire time you've been watching the video. Hopefully you've gotten to this point. At 4 points before the demo section, I swapped the mic out. I was using the USA 57, the USA 545, the Mexican 57, and the Mexican 545. Not necessarily in that order. Can you tell where the changes were done? Processing done to all the mics was the same across the board, so I didn't change any EQ to mess with one mic over the other, and compression was consistent across the board as well. Post your guesses in the comments section. Give me a timestamp and what mic you think it was. In addition, let me know which mic you thought performed best out of them all, and on what, if you think there was a clear winner. Or are they all so much in the ballpark it really doesn't matter too much? I hope this video helped to provide an unbiased and somewhat consistent comparison between these mics in real-world situations. I'm going to let the test results speak for themselves, but I will say that the placebo effect seems to be a pretty real thing in audio. Don't believe the hype, and always trust your ears more than someone else's opinion, no matter how famous they are. One last note, there are many fakes out there of the SM57 and the 545. Yeah, they faked that one too. Buying a 57 or 545 from an unauthorized dealer is a risky bet, and because of this, the secondhand market for these mics is pretty much off limits for me at this point. If you see either of these mics new for under $100 on places like eBay or Amazon, it's a safe bet that it's going to be a fake. And yes, the mics do sound different. I got scammed not long ago with a 545, and the difference between the two mics is very noticeable. Caveat emptor. As always, if you've gotten anything from today's video, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're interested in studio mics and other things audio related, hit that notify button so you'll be notified when we put up a new video. If you have any suggestions for a video or any questions regarding this one or anything else, please use that comment section or send us a message through our website. I'd love to hear from you. Well, that's it for this time. This is Pags, signing off.